The Murphy's Tavern in Camden buzzed with its usual Tuesday evening crowd, a mix of Irish immigrants seeking comfort food and tourists hunting for an authentic London pub experience. The warm glow of traditional brass fixtures cast dancing shadows across dark wooden tables scarred by decades of pint glasses and hearty conversations. Behind the bar, bottles of Jameson and Bushmills stood like sentries, while the familiar strains of traditional Irish music drifted from speakers mounted in corners decorated with vintage Guinness advertisements. Cillian O'Sullivan moved through this familiar chaos like a man possessed, balancing plates with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting the art of survival through service. At 22, he carried himself with the wiry strength of youth, stretched thin by responsibility, far beyond his years. His dark hair, perpetually tousled from rushing between tables, framed a face that might have been handsome, if not for the deep circles under his green eyes and the permanent tension lines that had settled around his mouth. 3 days. That's how long it had been since Cillian had managed more than 2 consecutive hours of sleep. His schedule had become a relentless cycle that began at 5 a.m. with a cleaning shift at the office building down the street, continued with a full day at Murphy's, and ended with a night shift stocking shelves at the Tesco Express. 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, with only brief interludes to check on his younger sister Siobhan and catch fragments of sleep that never felt quite real. The reason for this punishing routine was simple and devastating. Siobhan O'Sullivan, 16 years old, and the only family Cillian had left in the world, was dying of cystic fibrosis. The NHS provided basic care, but the experimental treatment that might save her life, a new gene therapy being trialled at a private clinic in Switzerland, cost $47,000, money that might as well have been £1 million for a young Irish immigrant working service jobs in London. Table 6 is asking about their fish and chips again, called Niamh Flanagan, a veteran server in her 50s, who had taken Cillian under her wing when he'd started at Murphy's 2 years earlier. Her County Cork accent had softened during her 20 years in London, but it still carried the warmth that made homesick Irish workers feel less alone in the vast city. Cillian nodded without looking up from the plate he was garnishing, his hands moving with automatic precision, even as his mind calculated the day's earnings. £12 in tips so far, plus his hourly wage. If the evening rush was good, he might clear £30. At this rate, he'd have enough for Siobhan's next month of medication, but the Swiss clinic felt as distant as the moon. "Cillian," Niamh said more softly, moving closer so other staff couldn't hear. "You look like death warmed over, love. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" He couldn't remember. Food had become purely functional, whatever was cheapest and fastest, eaten while standing in the kitchen between orders. "I'm grand, Niamh. Just tired is all. This isn't sustainable, you know that, right? You're going to collapse if you keep this up." Before Cillian could respond, the front door of Murphy's swung open with enough force to rattle the Irish tricolour hanging nearby. A group of 4 men entered, immediately commanding attention through sheer physical presence. The largest of the group stood well over 6 feet tall, his massive frame dressed in casual clothes that did nothing to disguise the power beneath. Intricate tattoos covered his forearms, and his eyes swept the room with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most formidable person in any space. Padraig McCarthy, the pub's owner and manager, emerged from behind the bar with the obsequious smile he reserved for customers who looked like they had money to spend. "Welcome to Murphy's, gentlemen. Table for 4. We've got a lovely spot by the window." The large man nodded, and his group followed Padraig to a prime table in the center of the dining area. Cillian watched from across the room, noting how other customers seemed to sense something significant about the newcomers without being able to identify exactly what it was. "That's your section," Niamh murmured, gesturing toward the table. "Better get over there." Cillian grabbed a handful of menus and approached the table, forcing his exhausted features into something resembling professional friendliness. "Good evening, gentlemen. I'm Cillian, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with drinks?" The large man looked up, and Cillian was struck by eyes that seemed both gentle and intensely alert. "Pint of Guinness for me, thanks." "Lads," his companions ordered quickly, 2 more Guinness and a Jameson neat. Simple enough. Cillian hurried to the bar, grateful for what seemed like it might be a straightforward table. The first sign of trouble came when he returned with the drinks. As Cillian set down the pints with practiced care, the large man frowned at his glass. "This doesn't look right," he said, holding up the Guinness to examine the foam. "The head's all wrong. Can you get me another one?" Cillian looked at the pint, which appeared perfectly normal to his trained eye, but nodded politely. "Of course, sir. I'll get you a fresh one right away." He returned to the bar, where the bartender, Sean, raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong with that one?" "Customer wants it replaced," Cillian said, trying to keep the irritation out of his voice. In his current state, every extra trip felt like climbing a mountain. 5 minutes later, he delivered the replacement pint. The large man took a sip, made a face, and pushed it away. "No, this one's worse. The temperature's off. Maybe get someone else to pull it." Cillian felt his jaw clench involuntarily. Sean was one of the best bartenders in Camden, with 15 years of experience pulling perfect pints, but he forced another smile. "No problem, sir. Let me get Sean to handle this personally." The third pint met the same fate. "Still not right. Are you sure your lines are clean?" By now, other customers were beginning to notice the exchange. Cillian could feel Padraig's eyes on him from across the room, a warning to keep the customer happy, regardless of the absurdity of the complaints. "I apologize, sir," Cillian said, his voice tight with the effort of maintaining professionalism. "Perhaps you'd prefer a different drink? We have excellent whiskey or—" "No, I want the Guinness, but I want it done right. Are your staff properly trained here?" The question hit Cillian like a slap. He had been working in pubs since he was old enough to legally serve alcohol, had never received a complaint about drink quality, and was running on 3 hours of sleep over 3 days to pay for his dying sister's medication. Something hot and dangerous began building in his chest. "I assure you, sir, our staff are very well trained," he managed. "Could have fooled me. Try again." Cillian stood frozen for a moment, fighting an internal battle between his desperate need for this job and his rapidly fraying self-control. The exhaustion, the stress, the constant weight of Siobhan's illness, and now this man's inexplicable determination to humiliate him in front of the entire pub. It was too much. The fourth pint came back with the same complaint. "This is ridiculous. Are you having a laugh? I've never seen service this poor." And then the man did something that shattered Cillian's last vestige of restraint. He stood up, gestured broadly to encompass the entire pub, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Is this really the best this place can do? I mean, honestly, how hard is it to pour a proper pint?" The public humiliation was the final straw. Cillian felt 3 days of accumulated frustration, fear, and exhaustion crystallize into pure rage. The professional mask he had been desperately maintaining cracked and fell away entirely. "Listen here, you arrogant piece of shit!" Cillian's voice rang out across the suddenly silent pub, his Irish accent thickening with emotion. "You think you're better than everyone else because you can afford to waste good beer? Well, you're not. You're just another entitled bastard who gets his kicks making working people miserable." The silence that followed was absolute. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused halfway to its owner's mouth. Every breath seemed held in anticipation of what would happen next. "Some of us," Cillian continued, his voice shaking with fury, "are working ourselves to death just to survive, just to take care of the people we love. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Sitting there in your expensive clothes complaining about perfectly good beer because you've got nothing better to do with your miserable life." The large man stood slowly, his massive frame unfolding to its full intimidating height. But instead of the angry response Cillian expected, the man's expression was one of curious interest, as if he were studying a particularly fascinating specimen. "You finished?" the man asked quietly. "Yeah," Cillian said, his chest heaving. "Yeah, I'm finished. I'm finished with you, I'm finished with this job, and I'm finished with pretending that people like you deserve respect you haven't earned." That's when Neve appeared at his elbow, her face white with horror. "Cillian," she whispered urgently, "do you know who you just insulted?" The question hit him like ice water. For the first time since his explosion began, Cillian really looked at the man standing before him, took in the size, the presence, the way other customers were now openly staring not just at the confrontation, but at the man himself. "Who?" Cillian asked, though something in his stomach was already telling him he didn't want to know the answer. Neve's voice was barely audible. "That's Tyson Fury." The name hit Cillian like a physical blow. Even someone who didn't follow boxing knew that name. The Gypsy King, heavyweight champion of the world, one of the most famous athletes in Britain. And Cillian had just called him an arrogant piece of shit in front of a room full of people with phones. As if summoned by the universe's sense of cosmic timing, Padraig McCarthy came charging across the pub floor, his face purple with rage and panic. "You're fired," he screamed at Cillian. Get out now, you're banned from this premises." Cillian felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The job at Murphy's wasn't just employment, it was the cornerstone of his financial survival. Without it, he couldn't afford Siobhan's medication. Without it, She would die. The devastating reality of what he had just done crashed over him like a wave. Not only had he insulted one of the most famous people in Britain, he had done it in front of dozens of witnesses with cameras. His reputation was ruined, his job was gone, and his sister's life hung in the balance. Looking up at Tyson Fury, seeing his own professional destruction reflected in the eyes of the man he had just publicly humiliated, Cillian O'Sullivan realized that the next few minutes would determine whether his sister lived or died. The silence in Murphy's Tavern had become oppressive, broken only by the soft clicks of phone cameras capturing what everyone sensed was about to become a viral moment. Cillian stood frozen in the center of the dining room, his face cycling through emotions as the full magnitude of his situation became clear. Around him, customers held their phones at varying angles, some being discreet, others openly filming what they assumed would be either a celebrity confrontation or a public apology. Tyson Fury remained standing beside his table, his expression unreadable as he studied the young waiter who had just delivered the most public dressing down of his career. His three companions, friends who had joined him for what was supposed to be a quiet evening meal, sat motionless, unsure whether to intervene or simply document whatever was about to unfold. Padraig McCarthy continued his furious advance across the pub floor, his face now approaching a dangerous shade of crimson. As the owner of Murphy's, he had built his business on creating a welcoming atmosphere for both locals and celebrities, and watching one of his employees publicly abuse the most famous boxer in the world represented his worst possible nightmare. 20 years! Padraig shouted, his Cork accent thickening with rage. 20 years I've been building the reputation of this establishment, and you destroy it in 30 seconds. You're not just fired, you're blacklisted. I'll make sure you never work in hospitality in London again. The threat hit Cillian with devastating precision. The Irish community in London was tight-knit, and word travelled fast between pub owners. If Padraig followed through on his promise, Cillian wouldn't just lose this job, he'd lose any possibility of finding similar work anywhere in the city. Padraig, please, Cillian said, his voice cracking with desperation. I'll apologize. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't what? Don't fire the employee who just insulted Tyson Bloody Fury in my pub? Are you completely mental? Padraig turned to Tyson with the kind of apologetic groveling typically reserved for natural disasters. Mr. Fury, I am so incredibly sorry. This individual does not represent the values of Murphy's Tavern. We are honored by your presence, and I assure you this will never happen again. Tyson held up a hand, the gesture surprisingly gentle for someone of his imposing size. It's all right, mate, no harm done. But Padraig wasn't finished with his public execution. Security will escort him out immediately. His employment is terminated with immediate effect, and he'll be banned from the premises permanently. As if summoned by Padraig's words, two burly men who worked security for the pub on busy nights appeared from their positions near the bar. They moved towards Cillian with the resigned efficiency of people who had handled similar situations before, though probably never involving such a famous witness. Wait, Cillian said, backing away from the approaching security guards. Please just wait a minute. He turned to face Tyson Fury, desperation overriding the embarrassment that was threatening to consume him. Around them, the phone cameras continued recording, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the most humiliating experience of Cillian's life. Mr. Fury, Cillian said, his voice shaking. I am so sorry. I had no idea who you were. I'm not making excuses for what I said. There's no excuse for it. But please, if there's anything I can do. Tyson studied him with those intense, intelligent eyes. What's your name, son? Cillian O'Sullivan. Irish? Yes, sir. From County Cork originally. What's got you so wound up, Cillian? That wasn't just someone having a bad day. That was someone at the end of their rope. The question, asked with unexpected gentleness, nearly broke down what remained of Cillian's composure. He looked around the pub at all the people watching him, at the phones capturing his humiliation for posterity, at Padraig still vibrating with rage, and felt the weight of his impossible situation crushing down on him. My sister, he said quietly. My sister is dying. The words hung in the air like a confession. Several people lowered their phones, sensing that the moment had shifted from entertainment to something more serious. What's wrong with her? Tyson asked. Cystic fibrosis. She's 16 and she's not responding to the standard treatments anymore. There's an experimental therapy in Switzerland that might help, but it costs... Cillian's voice broke. It costs £47,000. Niamh, who had been watching the confrontation with growing distress, stepped closer to Cillian. He works 3 jobs, she told Tyson. 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. I've been watching him for months, and he's killing himself trying to raise the money. That's not Mr. Fury's problem, Padraig interjected harshly. Personal circumstances don't excuse professional misconduct. But Tyson raised his hand again, this time with enough authority to silence the pub owner immediately. How much have you raised so far? Cillian wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to maintain some dignity despite the public nature of the conversation. About £8,000. I've been saving every penny for 2 years, but the treatment, we need to start it within the next month, or... He couldn't finish the sentence. Around the pub, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What had begun as entertainment, a worker melting down in front of a celebrity, had become something much more human and heartbreaking. What's your sister's name? Tyson asked. Siobhan O'Sullivan. And where is she now? At home, in our flat in Kentish Town. She can't really go out much anymore. The treatments make her too tired, and her immune system... Cillian trailed off, realizing he was oversharing with a stranger, even if that stranger happened to be one of the most famous people in Britain. One of Tyson's companions leaned forward and whispered something in his ear. Tyson nodded, then pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking too quietly for others to hear. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Padraig, Tyson said, turning to the pub owner, I want you to give Cillian his job back. The silence that followed was so complete that the distant sound of London traffic seemed intrusive. Padraig's face went through several different expressions as he processed what he had just heard. Mr. Fury, with all due respect, I can't have employees who work 3 jobs to pay for their dying sister's medical treatment. Tyson's voice carried a hint of steel now. Who are so exhausted from carrying impossible burdens that they occasionally lose their temper. But he insulted you, publicly. It's already being filmed, and I'm publicly telling you to give him his job back. Unless you think you know better than I do how I should handle being insulted. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Padraig McCarthy might own Murphy's Tavern, but he wasn't about to argue with Tyson Fury in front of a room full of witnesses, especially not when those witnesses were filming everything. Of course not, Mr. Fury. If that's what you want... Padraig's voice trailed off as he struggled to process this unexpected turn of events. It is what I want, Tyson confirmed. Then he turned back to Cillian, who was staring at him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. But that's not all I want, Tyson continued. Cillian, I want you to give me your sister's medical information. Doctor's name, hospital, details about this treatment in Switzerland, everything. I don't understand, Cillian said. You will. Meet me here tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Bring everything you've got about Siobhan's condition and this experimental treatment. Can you do that? Cillian nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Good, now get back to work. And next time someone complains about their pint, just bring them a different beer instead of questioning their parentage, all right? The gentle humor in Tyson's voice broke the tension that had been suffocating the pub. A few people actually laughed, and the atmosphere began to shift from crisis back toward normalcy. As Cillian stumbled back toward the kitchen, his mind reeling from the emotional whiplash of the last 15 minutes, he caught Niamh's eye. She was crying openly now, not bothering to hide her tears. What just happened? He asked her. I think, she said, wiping her face with a bar towel, you just met someone who understands what it means to fight for family. Around them, Murphy's Tavern slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but everyone present understood they had witnessed something extraordinary. The phones that had captured Cillian's meltdown had also recorded Tyson Fury's response. Not anger, not retaliation, but compassion for someone carrying an impossible burden. As Cillian returned to his tables, trying to process what had just occurred, he had no way of knowing that the next 24 hours would change his and Siobhan's lives forever. 24 hours later, Cillian O'Sullivan sat at the same table where his world had nearly ended, clutching a manila folder containing every piece of medical documentation related to his sister's condition. His hands shook slightly as he organized the papers for the 3rd time, trying to make sense of what was happening while fighting the exhaustion that seemed to have settled permanently in his bones. Murphy's Tavern was quieter than it had been the night before, with the usual Tuesday evening crowd replaced by a more subdued Wednesday atmosphere. Niamh had insisted on staying late to witness whatever was about to unfold, and even Padraig hovered nearby, still processing the surreal events of the previous evening. At exactly 6 o'clock the front door opened, and Tyson Fury entered alone. Without the presence of his friends and the drama of the previous night's confrontation, he seemed somehow larger, his natural charisma filling the space as heads turned to watch his movement through the pub. He spotted Cillian immediately and walked over with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in any environment. Up close, without the adrenaline and panic of their first encounter, Cillian could see the intelligence in Tyson's eyes, the careful way he assessed situations before acting. "Cillian," Tyson said, settling his considerable frame into the chair across from the young Irishman, "how are you holding up?" "Better than yesterday," Cillian replied honestly, "though that's not saying much." Tyson smiled at the dry response. "Fair enough. Did you bring the medical information?" Cillian pushed the folder across the table, his heart pounding as he watched one of the most famous athletes in the world carefully examine his sister's medical records. Tyson read with the focused attention of someone who understood that lives hung in the balance of such documents. Siobhan O'Sullivan, 16 years old, diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at age 3, Tyson read aloud. Progressive deterioration, despite standard treatments. Candidate for experimental gene therapy at the Zurich Institute for Advanced Pulmonary Medicine. He looked up. "This treatment, they think it could cure her." "Not cure exactly," Cillian said carefully. "But it could halt the progression and maybe reverse some of the damage. She might live a normal life instead of—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Instead of dying before she turns 20, Tyson completed gently. Cillian nodded, not trusting his voice. Tyson continued reading, occasionally asking questions about specific treatments Siobhan had tried, her current condition, and the timeline for the Swiss therapy. His questions were informed and thoughtful, suggesting he had done considerable research since their conversation the night before. "The treatment needs to begin within the next month," Tyson said finally, "and the total cost is £47,000, with a £15,000 deposit required to secure her spot." "That's right. I've got 8,000 saved, but—" Cillian's voice trailed off as he confronted the mathematical impossibility of his situation. Tyson closed the folder and looked directly at Cillian. "I called the clinic this morning, spoke with Dr. Herman Weiss, who runs the program. He confirmed everything you've told me about Siobhan's candidacy for the treatment." Cillian felt his stomach drop. "You called them? But how did you—" "I also had my financial team wire £39,000 to the clinic's account," Tyson continued, as if Cillian hadn't spoken. "Combined with your 8,000, that covers the full cost of Siobhan's treatment." The words hit Cillian like a physical blow. He stared at Tyson, certain he had misheard or misunderstood something fundamental about what was being said. "I'm sorry. What?" he managed. "Your sister's treatment is paid for," Tyson said simply. "Dr. Weiss is expecting you to call tomorrow to schedule her initial consultation. They can have her started within 2 weeks. Cillian felt the pub spinning around him. £39,000. More money than he could have earned in 5 years of his current schedule, given freely by a man he had insulted and humiliated just 24 hours earlier. I can't." Cillian struggled to form coherent thoughts. "Why would you do this?" Tyson leaned back in his chair, considering the question seriously. "You know, people always want to know about the hardest fight of my career. They expect me to talk about Wilder or Joshua or some other heavyweight who tried to knock my head off." He paused, looking around the pub before continuing. "But the hardest fight of my life wasn't in any ring. It was against my own mind, when depression had me convinced that the world would be better off without me. I was the heavyweight champion of the world, had more money than I could spend, and I wanted to die because I couldn't see any reason to keep going." Cillian listened in stunned silence as one of the world's most successful athletes revealed his darkest moments. "You know what saved me?" Tyson asked. "People who cared enough to fight for me when I couldn't fight for myself. My wife, my family, friends who refused to let me give up even when I wanted to." He gestured toward the folder containing Siobhan's medical records. "Yesterday I watched a young man work himself to death because he loves his sister enough to sacrifice everything for her. That's the kind of fight that matters more than any championship belt. That's the kind of strength that deserves respect." Cillian felt tears starting to build behind his eyes. "But £39,000, that's an incredible amount of money." "Not to me, it isn't," Tyson replied matter-of-factly. "I make more than that in appearance fees for corporate events I forget about an hour later. But to you and Siobhan, it's everything. It's her life." The simple truth of the statement overwhelmed Cillian completely. 2 years of desperate struggle, of 18-hour days and constant worry, of watching his sister grow weaker while he fought an impossible battle against medical bills and time, all of it resolved in a single act of generosity from a stranger. "I don't know how to thank you," Cillian said, his voice breaking. "Don't thank me yet," Tyson said with a slight smile. "Wait until Siobhan's better. Then you can thank me by doing something with your life that honors what she went through." "What do you mean?" "I mean you've got intelligence, determination, and more heart than anyone I've met in a long time. Once Siobhan's healthy and you're not working 3 jobs just to survive, figure out what you want to do with those qualities." Tyson stood up, preparing to leave, but paused as if remembering something important. "There's one more thing," he said. "I'm starting a foundation for young people who are caring for sick family members. Kids like you who are sacrificing their own futures to take care of the people they love. I want you to help me run it." Cillian stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to work for you? With me? Not for me. You understand what these families are going through in a way I never could. Your experience, your perspective, that's exactly what the foundation needs. But I'm just a waiter." "No," Tyson interrupted firmly. "You're a young man who spent 2 years fighting an impossible battle because you refused to give up on someone you love. That makes you exactly the kind of person who should be helping other families in similar situations." As Tyson prepared to leave Murphy's Tavern for the second time in 2 days, Cillian stood up on unsteady legs. "Mr. Fury," he called out. "Yesterday, when I lost my temper, when I said those horrible things to you, you were protecting your dignity," Tyson replied. "You were standing up for yourself against someone you thought was trying to humiliate you for no reason. That takes courage, even when it's misdirected. But I was wrong about you, completely wrong." Tyson smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "Yeah, you were. But you know what? Sometimes being wrong about someone is the best mistake you can make." 6 months later, Siobhan O'Sullivan walked into Murphy's Tavern under her own power for the first time in 3 years. The experimental treatment had exceeded every expectation, not only halting the progression of her cystic fibrosis, but actually reversing much of the damage to her lungs. She was healthy, vibrant, and planning to start university in the fall. Cillian, now the coordinator of the Fury Foundation for Young Carers, had just returned from Switzerland, where he had helped arrange treatment for 2 more teenagers whose families couldn't afford the experimental therapy. The foundation had already assisted 37 families, funded entirely by Tyson's initial donation, and a growing network of supporters, inspired by the story of a waiter who insulted a celebrity and ended up saving his sister's life. On the wall of Murphy's, in a place of honor behind the bar, hung a framed photograph of Tyson Fury with his arms around Cillian and Siobhan O'Sullivan. Below it, a small brass plaque bore the inscription that had become the foundation's motto: "The strongest people are not those who show strength in front of us, but those who win battles we know nothing about." Padraig McCarthy, who had learned more about human nature in 5 minutes than in 20 years of running a pub, still told the story to anyone who would listen. But he always ended it the same way. "Sometimes the worst moments of our lives turn out to be the first moments of something beautiful. And sometimes the people we think we have all figured out surprise us in ways that change everything." As for Cillian O'Sullivan, he kept one reminder of that terrible, wonderful night when his world fell apart and came back together. In his wallet, next to a picture of Siobhan on her first day of university, he carried the original receipt from that infamous pint of Guinness, the one that had started everything. Because sometimes, he had learned, the most important conversations begin with the smallest complaints, and the most extraordinary generosity comes from the most unexpected places.